So firstly, of course, I would like to pay my respects to the original owners of this country and their elders past and present. On behalf of the Committee for Greater Shepparton, also thank you to Andrew Fairley and the Sir Andrew and Lady Fairley Foundation for giving the Committee for Greater Shepparton the privilege of pulling this day together. It's been a fascinating journey for us because this is not certainly not my core space, and I've been on a rapid learning curve, and I've enjoyed every minute of it, I have to say. As a committee, we have high hopes for new levels of understanding that are going to come out of this day about where Shepparton is and where its opportunities lie, what roadblocks will lie in the way of this community making the most of itself and being the best it can be. Let me tell you, there's absolutely no shortage of challenges here, but in our view, they're outweighed by the opportunities. We need to recognise that, and we need to build the pathways between the two. We also have very high hopes for stronger and renewed relationships and partnerships and collaborations that will come out of this day. We really hope for a sense of common will and a clear articulation and a clear understanding from us about what sort of town we want to live in the future. And Nigel will talk a bit more about that later on when he talks about some of the work that he's just been doing recently on behalf of the committee. On behalf of the committee, of course, I welcome you all, and we really appreciate the sacrifices you've each made in order to be here with us today and have a think about where we're going. So let me tell you a few things about Shepparton from our point of view, and a few things about the Committee for Greater Shepparton. In many respects now, Shepparton's story is a tale of two cities. And initially, I can do no better than to quote the opening lines from Katrina Alford's report, which has been forwarded to you all for background reading, the socio-economic survey. And her opening line is, Shepparton has been a success story, which is a pretty powerful opening line, and I think that's a headline for me. Until the late 1990s, it goes on, Shepparton was a relatively job-rich area, providing work for those who wanted it. Unemployments were historically lower than in other Victorian cities and towns. The town has had a rich history and a very, very strong past. Shepparton had a place in the national consciousness as a place made rich by irrigation and as an area prized for the highly valued fruit and milk that it produced. Although we've always been a significantly smaller regional centre than Ballarat and Bendigo, for argument's sake, the regional peers we like to measure ourselves against, Shepparton also had a reputation for punching well above its weight in an economic sense, agricultural value adding, and being a very functional community. Shepparton was and still is, of course, home to some nationally significant businesses, and it proudly regarded itself as a can-do and a private enterprise town who made and shaped its own future. As with all agricultural-based economies, Shepparton was challenged from time to time as poor seasonal conditions and unfavourable commodity prices sometimes combined to put great pressure on one or other of our sectors, sometimes both at the same time. And that pressure did flow into town from time to time into the city areas or the urban areas. But historically and strongly, Shepparton always rallied and came back more strongly than it ever had before. Shepparton's strength was, and certainly still is, its people, who are resilient, organised, adaptive and innovative, well ahead of their time. These characteristics are clearly reflected in our history in areas such as successful migrant assimilation, horticultural innovation, dairy production, natural resource management, food processing innovation, and the relatively early formation of well-organised Indigenous organisations. These things set Shepparton apart from the rest of regional Victoria for decades. However, our greatest strength, as is often the case, our do-it-ourselves attitude in Shepparton's case gradually became our Achilles heel. Through the 2000s, when Shepparton faced a confluence of the most significant challenges it perhaps had ever faced, it took some time to realise that the ground had shifted from under us. And in fact, a tectonic shift was underway. Many parts of our community were quite ill-equipped to recognise that shift early enough and to know what to do about it. Key to the challenges that arose over that 10 or 12 year period were the millennium drought, which absolutely strangled our productive capacity here, having an impact on employment and people's perception of what the future could be here, with the water resource challenge. A structurally high Australian dollar was crucial, which absolutely crippled our export capacity, and Shepparton, Greater Shepparton, has always been an area of the Goulburn Valley with an international focus for what it does here. Another thing that's always traditionally set us apart. The high dollar crippled that. a rapidly changing demographic over that period as well, and a bit of a lack of understanding that refugees were different to migrants and had different needs. And ultimately, in my mind, a lack of whole of community recognition about the two-tiered society we had evolved into. These issues had a clearly observable effect on the psychology of Shepparton. Unfortunately, our citizens were often leading the charge in voicing strong fears and anxiety about what the future of Shepparton might be. Our civic pride and our sense of self eroded significantly over this period. At that stage, by the end of the Millennium Drought, 2011-12, thereabouts, our community across all sectors had been challenged for so long by so many externalities that we forgot just how strong our fundamentals actually were. And I really believe we're in the process of rediscovering that. It must be accepted, however, that through that period, many parts of our community were too slow to understand the impact that these and other issues were having on our social fabric. Over that period, 2001, 2011, 12, it's now evident that the social cracks, which had always existed in Shepparton, in common with most other regional communities, had actually developed here into fault lines. Proud Shepparton did not know how to admit that it needed to ask for help, it didn't know who to ask for help, and it didn't know where to ask for help. On a whole of community basis, recognising our challenges and confronting them with a common purpose has got to be the start of the response to that. In mid-2012, a small group of concerned local citizens held a public meeting. There was only a core group of about half a dozen, where we put the case for the formation of a committee for Greater Shepparton to about 200 community leaders. And it's acknowledged that in the room at that time there was a heavy weighting of business leaders. We presented, with the help of the Fairley Foundation and other speakers, we presented quite a stark picture of where Shepparton was at on a number of key indicators and a number of important measures. Measures such as health outcomes, educational attainment, workforce participation, childhood development, and clear evidence of emerging intergenerational structural disadvantage. And despite the room that night being full of long-term, active, engaged local citizens, I really think it's fair to say that a lot of the information that night was an absolute revelation for many of them. And of course, I recognise that in that room, and I exclude those that have been toiling in the community services sector for a long time and who are only too well aware, critically aware of the issues that were being presented and articulated that night, some of which had been recognised very early by some of these important leaders in our community and which were really being heroically confronted against mounting odds. But at that stage, up to that stage, Shepparton was clearly in the midst of a defining period of challenge. And unfortunately, a substantial proportion of the city didn't even know it. At the same time, those fighting the good fight in the community services sector had probably developed a very bleak view of the entire city and its probable future. And thus, a tale of two cities, neither end of town recognising each other. Those of us intent on making Shepparton's future all it can be must be focused on making Shepparton's tale a tale of one city, not of two. The mantra of Shepparton, as I alluded to before, a private enterprise and can-do town. We do it for ourselves here, and it's one of the things we like to try and differentiate ourselves apart from our regional peers again. You know, we drive our own future here. And on that front, the mantra has probably been, historically, what's good for business is good for Shepparton. And through the committee and our work and our conversations, we're really trying to reshape that for our members and express that what's good for Shepparton will ultimately be good for business. It's a very radical mind shift in how they understand their part in the world and our community and the part they have to play in it. 180-degree shift, and it's got a lot of resonance and buy-in straight away. In the committee forum, we now have a very high level of engagement from a key group of citizens who are used to making things happen. And they keenly understand that our two-tiered community here is not someone else's problem. This group are used to recognising opportunity and being innovative about how to seize chances. Many run successful businesses or successful organisations right across all sectors of the local community and economy. But now we're looking to build a high-level and cross-sector strategy for the future, not with a focus on short-term profit for our businesses in any respect, but a long-term focus on making Shepparton the most inclusive and healthy and engaged community it can possibly be. In other words, we want Shepparton to be one city again. This event has been titled a Philanthropic Summit, and while this room is clearly full of local not-for-profit providers who need resources for their crucial programs, and external trusts and foundations and philanthropics who ostensibly have the resources that they, there can be a line drawn between the two there. This day in our mind is not about money. We want this day to be about relationship building, both within our community here and with those whose help Greater Shepparton needs, the help we need to build our best future. So the focus again today is not on money. It's on information and it's on vision. It will display to everyone here that Shepparton has the whole of community will to confront the challenges that exist here and to become a safer and fairer and more inclusive city than it is today. We'll be hearing from key figures in sectors that have crucial roles to play in this journey. We'll understand that the value of our whole community will be much more than the sum of our parts by accommodating and respecting and supporting each other's contributions. The part that the Committee for Greater Shepparton can play in this journey will vary from sector to sector and from project to project and from time to time. It can move from that of an instigator, a facilitator, an advocate, right through to get out of the road and leave us alone. The committee is entirely open to that full range of responses. We're not here to claim any territory, nor act as a gatekeeper. We're certainly not here as white knights with all the answers. Quite the contrary, we come to this space very humbly. When our members come to the committee, they leave the individual interests of their businesses and organisations in the background. We elevate our thinking to what is best for Greater Shepparton, not what's best for my space, how can I position my business, where can I get a win out of this. That is all in the background. We utilise their resources and their networks and their intelligence and their skill at a higher level. They leave that their day-to-day work in the background. And when we move into the workshop sessions this afternoon, which are going to be the absolute generator of what comes out of this day, I see the early morning sessions in terms of primers to get our thinking in the right place, understand some context, some scene setting. But what comes out of the workshops is going to be crucial. That's going to give us some signposts as to the best way forward from the best wisdom we can draw out of this room. And I urge you, when you get into those workshops, to, again, elevate your thinking, not what's best for your organisation, not what's best for your program. Think about, in the sector that you're in, what's best for my sector and how can that build to a common vision for the best Shepparton we can possibly be. We do have a very information-rich program today. I'm certain that there'll be something new for each of us, and hopefully new ideas can flow out of that as well. New will, in the same way that the Philanthropic Summit organised 2 years ago was the genesis for the Lighthouse program, which is really has the potential to make an enormous difference here. Ideas as big as that in different sectors, in different spaces, but building towards a common vision of what we'd love to see come out of this day. Just the germs of the initial ideas that we could then run with, work up, and by community collaboration and buy-in and engagement with. Ultimately, from a committee point of view, I'd just like to close with saying we exist for one purpose. We're here to work collaboratively for a stronger and fairer Greater Shepparton, and we're here to work with anyone who's ready to work with us. So, thank you very much.